Welcome back to part 2 of your questions answered. In this video we're going to look at piracy. Are there really pirates out there? Women superyacht owners? And how helicopters are handled on board superyachts. Stay tuned. Lonnie Stewart, are there any women superyacht owners? Not many that I know of. There are a couple. I did actually a video last year in Barcelona when I talked about one of the women who owns Walmart. They owned a boat. I can't remember the name of the boat right now, but they sold that boat and they bought actually Jubilee, which is a massive 110 meter super yacht. She's actually part owner of Walmart, and I think he owns. I think they own it jointly. There are some other boats as well. I know Royal Romance technically is owned by a woman, but I believe it was a gift from the husband to the wife. I don't really think she really owns it, but it's in her name. For whatever reason that might be, I don't know. But they are out there, but they're not as common as the men. ZHP 500. When you bring food provisions from another port or country, do you have any issues? No, you don't. There's only one place I can think of that has very, very strict rules on bringing food in, and that's the Galapagos Islands. And for obvious reasons, they have very strict rules, and you have to get rid of a lot of stuff. But the general rule is, as long as you don't try to land any of that stuff, i.e., if I'm in Gibraltar and I buy a load of fruit, and then we sail to Madeira, or if I go to the Caribbean or wherever you want to, another country, I'm not allowed to take that ashore officially. So there's no chance of any cross-spread disease or anything like that. Felice Graziano, have any of the yachts you've worked on featured a ship's cat? The ship's cat's kind of old-fashioned. My father worked at sea in the 40s and 50s, and there was a very strong tradition of having a ship's cat. I've worked on a boat where the owners had a dog, and the dog was a pain in the butt, to be honest. So we actually had the deckhands actually built these wooden boxes, and they actually had soil in it, and they grew grass, and they would look after that all year round. And then when the owner came on, they would put these out in certain areas, and the dog supposedly would use it to pee and do number twos on it. No, I've never seen a ship's cat on any super yacht, or any ship for that matter. Patrick Cowfield says, how are aircraft crews handled on yachts? I noticed that a number of yachts have helicopters. Are there always pilots on board? What do they do when there are no flight ops? Yeah, it's a good question. Depending on the boat again, the helicopter isn't always on board. When the helicopter is on board, it's flown in by the pilot or pilots, depending on the size of the helicopter. Then once it's on board, it's strapped down. We have part of the crew are qualified are trained to deal with a helicopter landing, so they know how to direct it with the lights, etc. They know how to strap it down. Their fire teams are trained to deal with any accidents that may happen with fuel leaks, etc. Engineers are involved in that as well to activate the fire hoses and stuff. So everybody's trained on board to deal with it. Once the helicopter's on board, a pilot generally will stay with the boat. It's not always the case, but generally it is, especially if they're doing a transit. They usually will keep one helicopter pilot on board at least, just in case there's some emergency and they have to take it off. But it's not always the case. I have been on a boat where helicopters landed and then the pilots left, but I think we were just docked somewhere. I don't think we actually went anywhere. They generally, not always, but they generally will have a cabin for the pilot or pilots. And so when they come on board, they go in that cabin. Obviously they have to, if there's no flight operations, then they still have things to do. They have to clean the helicopter, make sure it's in good shape. They have to do all the checks. If you do a transit, with the helicopter on board, when you get to the other end, then you, depending on the helicopter, depending on how long it's been since it was flown, sometimes they have to bring people out to the boat and do checks on the helicopter before they fly it. So yeah, there's plenty for them to do. And occasionally they will help out with the crew, like provisions coming on board and stuff like that. Just depends on the pilot, I suppose. I've seen pilots being very good at that. Sometimes they've been, good with other things like carpentry and stuff, and they've helped out where they can. But it's generally they just sort of muck in with the crew, and they eat in a crew mess, and they're kind of part of the crew. Leo. What does the captain do whilst docking, and what papers do they fill out, and what does he do when the guests are eating? Well, the captain is steering the ship when they dock. He's in charge whenever the vessel goes into the port, or whenever it leaves the port. The captain is in charge of the boat. Depending on the size of the boat, he may also take a watch. If there's only 3 deck officers on board, including the captain, then he'll take a watch. So it'll be like 8 till 12, 12 till 4, 4 till 8, and then they split that between them, and they'll do 2 a day. If it's a bigger boat, a commercial boat, usually the captain does not do a watch. He just does docking and leaving. And as far as what paperwork they do, well, they do clearance forms. That's not done by the captain, that's done by the purser. He or she is in charge, usually a female actually, but in my experience. But he or she will do all of the legal paperwork that is required. I don't know the names of them, I'm not a purser, but they do all that stuff. They send a lot of stuff in advance before they arrive to make sure that's done. And as far as what does the captain do the rest of the time, he has the worst job on board, because he gets probably the least sleep out of anybody, because he's up the earliest. If the boat's leaving, he's got to be on the bridge. So let's say the boat's leaving to go somewhere at 5 a.m. He's on the bridge at 5 a.m. Then the boss gets up at let's say 9 a.m. So then the boss has any requests the boss has, any information about moving, it all goes through the captain. And then he's working the whole day, and then he's been up since 5 a.m. say. So then let's say we get to 7 p.m. Meal service is going on. Maybe the boss wants to go somewhere else, and then he's back on the bridge. So he's working, and he gets very little sleep during these periods. So it's not a job I would ever want to do, because of obviously they're in charge of the whole crew. They've got to deal with so many requests. They've got to deal with legal requests. They've got to deal with driving the boat. They've got to deal with the boss. Yeah, not a job that I would ever want. They're all over the place. They're mainly on the bridge or in that area in his office, but they're making decisions constantly about everything, basically. Michael Garvey, what do you do with garbage on trips that take months? That's a good question as well, because not a lot of people think about that. As far as super yachts go, not very often will you be at sea for months without docking somewhere, because there's no reason for that. And usually commercial vessels that do that, like big tankers and stuff that are delivering fuel from Hong Kong to somewhere across the other side of the world. For super yachts, the longest the super yacht's usually at sea. It's usually actually when the owner's on board and he doesn't want to dock anyway, he just wants to sit at anchor and then travel around different islands and stuff. As far as food waste goes, the food waste, when you're out in international waters, you can actually throw food waste over the side. So obviously the sea life will take care of that. As far as human waste goes, that goes through a sewage treatment plant, and it's treated to make it completely harmless to any sea life, and then that can be also discharged over the side in international waters. So that's 2 things that are taken care of. As far as waste like paper and plastic and metal and stuff like that, you cannot discharge that stuff over the side, and that stuff has to be stored. So what generally will happen with that stuff is it will have a garbage room on board, which is usually a big refrigerator, walk-in one, and that obviously the coolness keeps any food waste from stinking the place out. And then all of the food, all of the rubbish will be separated into different bags. Whereas wherever possible, it will be compressed in a compressor that's in that room usually, to minimize the space that it takes up. Any food waste, like if you're on a boat and it's in within the 12-mile limit or the 24-mile limit, sorry, of territorial waters, and you don't get a chance to throw the stuff over the side, that's the food waste will also be stored in that room. And then when you get the chance, like when you go to an island somewhere, the boss goes out, fishing or jet skiing or something, a little boat will come out which you arrange, and then they'll open the shell door and they'll throw all the bags out, and that guy will take it away and they pay him. And then also if you go into a big port and the owner's either on board or not on board, then they'll bring all that stuff out, and then they'll dispose of it in the bins ashore, and they'll pay, that's part of the mooring fees that you pay. If you're docked alongside for a long time, that garbage room is locked, so you can't use that. And then you will use the bins outside to throw all your rubbish away, and food and stuff like that. As far as the human waste and the grey water and all that kind of stuff from the toilets and everything, that still goes through the treatment plant, gets stored in tanks. When those tanks get full, if you're still not going anywhere, then you can actually order a service, and the truck comes and you connect the pipes up, and then you discharge it into the truck and they take it away. Does the captain ever have to step in and help repair the engine at sea? Has this happened to you? No, it's never happened to me, because the captain is not qualified to fix the engine, and the chief engineer is absolutely qualified. And so that most of in actual fact, when you go on a boat, usually you'll have, depending on the size, chief engineer, a second engineer, and then third engineers, and then again on the size, motormen also. The motorman is basically, he's not got a certificate of competency, and he's working, as an assistant. So he's doing like daily graft cleaning and helping with oil changes and stuff like that. Then you've got the chief engineer, obviously is in charge. The second engineer can be sort of like delegate work to the third engineers depending on how it's run. And but they're all qualified to fix these engines, and very often the second engineer actually has a chief engineer's ticket, or qualification. So they're all very qualified. But yeah, generally no, the captains, they're not qualified. They don't know an awful lot about it, and they're quite happy to leave that for the engineers. Sea Star, are there really pirates out there? If so, have you ever come across any? There are pirates. It's very rare. Some of the questions, the firearms questions I got in the last video, were mainly about that situation, and it's super. I mean, I've been at sea 20 years. I've been through areas that are known for having pirates, and I've never seen any pirates. So it's not some of the people talk like it's the Wild West and you're going to go out and immediately get attacked by the Black Pearl or something. It's not like that at all. There are areas, Straits of Malacca and the Indian Ocean, Gulf of Aden, and the Arabian Gulf in general is probably one of the hottest places. Down by Somalia, places like that, you do get them. The Gulf of Aden and near Somalia, and that's probably the worst for it. In recent years especially, and also these are areas that are not generally frequented by yachts, but when they do go that way, usually for transit to go somewhere else, they do take armed security. And I've been on vessels that have gone through that area, the Gulf of Aden, and we've taken on armed security, and then they've done a whole thing where not only do they have weapons on board, but they do training with the crew. What happens, they have a safe room on board. A lot of the new yachts are actually being built with safe rooms on them.
One of the vessels I used to work on, people often said that it looked like a military vessel. So when we were going through the Gulf of Aden, we decided to build our own gun. A fake gun, of course, but we built this gun, we fitted it to the bow of the ship, and it was quite convincing. We also had armed guards on board, of course.
It is, when you need it, it's available. It's very, very difficult to get those weapons on board and to get them off and to transit. I mean, a lot of it happens in international waters. So what a lot of these private companies were doing was they would have a boat, and they would, however they got them on board that boat, they would get them on the boat, they would keep the boat in international waters, like a pilot boat, and that's where those armed security would stay for the duration. And then as the boats came along, they would take a smaller boat, they would jump on with the weapons, they would get onto the boat, and then they would go down to the other end, they'd have another boat at the other end, and then they would get off. And when they couldn't have that situation in place, it was so difficult dealing with the weapons to get them cleared to go into countries and take them in, import them and export them, that they just started throwing them away. Like I said, I'm going to talk about, I'm going to do a video specifically on this subject. So Pushing Dirt, that's the guy's name, by the way. Having worked on many different yachts, would you prefer to work on smaller, medium, or larger size vessels? Thanks in advance. When I answered this question before, I'm not sure. Anyway, I'd definitely rather be on the yachts that are crewed by professionals that have their commercial licenses. And that's purely because generally they're older, and I'm older, and they've got more experience and they're more qualified, and they're more professional. That's just based on my own experience. I'm not saying that people who work on small yachts are not professional. I'm just saying that in my own experience, all of the yachts I've worked on, I've only worked on one yacht. No, I've worked on 2 yachts that were non-commercial, and I just found it to be not as professional. So I would rather be on the big yachts. All right, guys, that's it. I'm done. I've gone through all the questions that I have. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found it informative. If you have any questions, please make sure to put them in the comment section below. And then in the future, when I do another video, I'm going to use the questions from this for that next video.